We don't expect people to vanish from our lives, never to be heard of again.
67 women murdered or missing between Newcastle and Byron Bay, and their cases remain unsolved.
The police thought Leanne was just a runaway. That was it.
She would never turn her back on her children, never.
Many of these cases are linked.
Had patterns been missed?
There was a serial killer or serial killers operating on the mid-north coast.
One of the last times I ever hitchhiked. It shook me to the core.
The north coast of New South Wales on the east coast of Australia is an incredible place. It is a paradise. Beautiful, pristine beaches.
Quite free and easy, and it's an idyllic place to be.
It's one of the most beautiful places in Australia. Like, visually, it's striking. The beaches are stunning. The sand is white and the water is green and blue.
The lifestyle is really laid back. The summers are hot. It's all about barbecues and beaches, but the winters are also mild, paradise. The North Coast region really is an iconic part of Australia. It runs from the eastern seaboard, from the city of Newcastle, 2 hours north of Sydney, to the beautiful Byron Bay.
But it also has that dark underside.
There's a sense of free abandon. People think that they're safe because everyone has a good vibe to them. I think that's a mistake.
When you're carefree and easy, sometimes you let your guard down. There is a dark side to this region. It's well documented, and you can't hide from that.
I moved to the mid-north coast of New South Wales, Bellingen, in 2015. Bellingen's a tiny place between Newcastle to Byron Bay. Beautiful little rural village, a couple thousand people with a few more thousand people scattered in the hills. My name is Jeremy Buckingham. I'm a Member of Parliament, and my mission, my life's mission now, is to find answers to what happened to the murdered and missing women on the north coast of New South Wales. This is where we used to come and walk. We'd walk the dogs along this track every afternoon, a bit of fresh air, listen to the birds. But just over the hill here, there's a bit of a spot that's a little bit eerie. I know it sounds strange, but sometimes you walk into a house or you're in a certain spot and you get a weird feeling. And that's what happened here. I said to my wife, has something ever happened in this area? Something ever happened in this forest? And she said, well, just down the road, Rose Howell had disappeared a couple of decades before. I'd never heard of it, Rose Rain Howell, and I thought, how could it be that a woman had disappeared from this area? I'd never heard of it, so I started looking into it. I went home that night, sat down with a cup of tea and Googled up missing woman Bellingen. Rose Rain Howell, just 19 years old, had been a young woman, active, making plans, moving through the community, well known, well liked, and she had been hitchhiking, looking for a lift not far out of Bellingen when she just disappeared in the early 2000s. This is the old Pacific Highway just outside Bellingen. It's the last place that Rose Howe was ever seen alive. She'd been in town printing out invitations for her birthday, and she was travelling back home to the hippie commune, Bundadjan, just off in the bush there. Two people saw her walk towards a white car over here, and she was never seen again. Rose was the first case that I looked into, and I was shocked because not far from where I lived on the old Pacific Highway in the mid-90s, another young woman, Inika Hinckley, had been found, and she had been murdered and raped and her body dumped near an old truck stop on that Pacific Highway. Inika Hinckley was just 20 years old when she set out from Melbourne, travelling to Byron Bay on the north coast, a young musician with her whole life in front of her. It was 1996 when her body was found in this bush just over here. And you've got to consider this is just 1 kilometre from where 6 years later Rose Howe disappeared. Then I found a young mother, Susan Kiley, vanished, and the police had done almost nothing to investigate what happened to her. I just couldn't believe it. How could there be 3 women disappeared, one of them had been found murdered in this tiny little community, and almost no one was talking about it, and I wondered if this was symptomatic of a broader pattern.
My name's Gary Kiley. Regrettably, my sister Susan was, I have no doubt, murdered on December 1 or thereabouts in 1989. There's Susan in one of my favourite photos of her, happy and carefree in her early days. Susan was living up in Bellingen, the north coast of New South Wales, in the late 80s. She had divorced her husband, but she was, I think, fairly desperate to break away. So that's where she went with her daughter, Heidi. And also the hinterland of Bellingen is very attractive, very wooded. There's creeks, there's rivers, nice country town in New South Wales. So I could see why Susan would have been attracted to perhaps move to the north coast. This is a photo of Susan much later with Heidi, the younger daughter. We think Heidi must have been about 4 at that stage. Susan was living in some humble place just outside of Bellingen on New South Wales north coast with her younger daughter, Heidi. And Heidi was put on the school bus that morning. My sister had to then go into town at Bellingen, and as was her habit, she hitchhiked. She had no other means of getting in there. And she then joined some friends in town. They socialised for some time. Susan apparently then went to go to the bank. And that was it. After that time, no one can say what happened to Susan. At the time of Susan's disappearance, Heidi was 8 years old. When she got back from school that day, back in 1989, the house was vacant and her mother wasn't there. basic policing wasn't done, such as, in a normal course of events, you would expect that that house would have been a potential scene of a crime, or perhaps a homicide. I know she would never, ever just dump her daughter under those circumstances. I can only conclude that she was murdered. She would never turn her back on her children, never. No one conducted any interviews with people in the main street of Bellingen. No interviews were conducted. Records are scant about what police activity did take place. People that were interviewed about the disappearance, none of their alibis were rigorously questioned or checked. It took us 21 years to get a coroner's inquest. The coroner, he opened up proceedings by saying to the police that were in attendance, "Why has this taken 21 years for Susan's disappearance to come to a coroner's inquest?" He made the point that a lot happens in 21 years, and people who may have been prime suspects are perhaps have disappeared, could even be dead. And because of that, we've all suffered, and justice hasn't been done.
Talking to Gary Kiley was just such a shocking experience, because here was this man, his sister has disappeared, he's wondering every day what has happened to her. The coronial inquest said that the police did not have any evidence they could provide of what they had done at the time to actually investigate her disappearance. So how could that be the situation? How does a family deal with that their sister is disappeared, probably murdered, and the police are doing absolutely nothing? It's hard not to be affected when you look at these stories. I'd lost my son to suicide. That's something that happened. You understand loss. What it is to, you understand what it is to lose a child. And it's, terrible. And I know what happened to my son, but to imagine, not knowing, or an even worse circumstance. Try and deal with that.
Jeremy Buckingham became determined. He knew he had to keep digging because the disappearance of Susan Kiley and Rose Rain Howe, as well as the murder of Inika Hinckley in his hometown of Bellingen, have remained unsolved for decades. I'm Dimity Clancy. I'm a reporter with 60 Minutes, and I've covered crime for a lot of my career. The scale of what he uncovered is shocking. Jeremy Buckingham knew he had to keep digging because the disappearance of Susan Kiley and Rose Rain Howe, as well as the murder of Inika Hinckley in his hometown of Bellingen in Australia, have remained unsolved for decades. Someone knows something, and the killers are still getting away with it.
Well, what I did was look at whether or not what was happening in Bellingen and around was systemic across the mid-north coast. And so I started Googling up articles about murdered and missing women in the period from the 1970s to early 2000s. And what I found again and again and again, there were just more and more and more. It went from 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 to 25 into the 30s. 30 murdered and missing women on the mid-north coast that I could find just by Googling up documents. And I thought, how many more are there? I also asked the police through the parliamentary process how many more did they know of which weren't on my list. And some weeks later they came back shockingly, staggeringly, to say that there was another 35, which took the list to 67 unsolved homicides and disappearances on the north coast of New South Wales.
67 cases of murdered and missing women. It's an appalling and heartbreaking number.
So I thought to myself, I'm going to raise this in the New South Wales Parliament. I'm going to use the resources of the Parliament to find out what has been done to get justice for these women. It's an absolute anomaly, an appalling anomaly, and has every indication that someone operated in that area, travelled that area, lived across that area and took women, destroyed their bodies, destroyed their lives, and it is a stain on our society, and it's appalling that it's taken so long for this matter to come before the House and to public attention.
My name is Damien Learn. I'm a former detective sergeant and I've served for 35 years in the New South Wales Police Force. I have worked on probably 40 to 50 homicides. I've investigated a number of cold case murders, and I was amazed, 67. That to me tells us we have a problem. And I was astounded. It seems to me that no one's talked to each other to say that, hey, we've got a problem here, particularly in this region, this area, that there's a lot of people gone missing and nothing's been done about it.
Initially, the reaction was head scratching and people thought I was a bit bonkers. They thought I was, off in the weeds on some conspiracy theory. But when they read the list, and then when I raised the further list that the police had given me, there was total shock.
How could so many women go missing or be murdered in the one area over such a long period of time and their cases remain unsolved?
Until I started asking questions, no one had put this list together. That's what's so shocking, that no one in the police had come out and said, look, we've got a problem. We've got an issue that has to be dealt with. We want the community to get behind us in finding out what happened to these women who died, some of them, in appalling murders. And it appears the police did very little. Sometimes they did nothing for decades, not even interviewing families for up to 20 years after the fact. That is an absolute disgrace.
Until Jeremy Buckingham started to link these cases, literally year by year, town by town, nobody had any idea of the scale of the missing and murdered women between Newcastle and Byron Bay in Australia. Nearly 70 women over a 30-year period.
Is this 67 individual disappearances and homicides, or is it possible that some of them are linked in terms of the perpetrator, the MO, etc.? So I reached out to Xanthi Mallet. She's one of the most respected criminologists and academics working in this space, and she's well known in Australia for her analysis of criminals, criminal behaviour and serial killers in Australia. And I asked her to have a look at this data.
My name is Dr. Xanthi Mallet, and I'm an Associate Professor of Criminology at Central Queensland University. My area of expertise is criminology. I focus a lot on gendered violence, specifically women as both victims and offenders, and the crossover within the criminal justice space. But my background is truly forensic science. So I bring together the hard science of forensics and the behavioural science of criminology. I must admit I was quite shocked by the sheer numbers of cases. So my colleagues and I looked at data of missing and murdered women from 1977 along that corridor between the Newcastle and Byron regions. We started to look at patterns. Was there one individual who looked like they could have been responsible for a number of these cases? Had patterns been missed? What is going on that highway? Is there something victimology-wise about these groups, that tells us that this could be the same offender, or is it the area in which the offender appeared to be comfortable? When we started to look at the data between Newcastle and Byron, we noticed that there were more cases coming up in distinct regions. I think we're looking at different clusters. We believe there are 2, 3, maybe as many as 4 that have acted as serial predators along that highway.
So when you look at the north coast of New South Wales, you basically have cities every 80 to 100 kilometres up the coast. They're dot, 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 and little villages in between. But it's a strip that runs south to north. When you map it out, everywhere along that Pacific Highway, there are murdered and missing women, all the way along, and clusters in certain areas like Newcastle, Bellingen and Byron Bay. If you compare it to other areas that have a similar geography, similar demographics, there is nothing like it. It shows that something sinister and evil has been happening in this area for decades.
The Pacific Highway is one of Australia's most important and travelled transport links. But with 67 women either murdered or missing between Newcastle and Byron Bay, this really is a highway of horror.
When my colleagues and I started to look at this pattern of disappearances and murders along that coastal route, we noticed that there were specific areas where there was more activity. What it does highlight is a number of clusters that warrant further investigation. A cluster of cases are cases that could potentially be linked, that appear quite superficially to have certain things in common. So, for example, biological sex, age, and situation. And some of those cases within that cluster may be connected by a perpetrator, for example. But just because you have a cluster of young people in one area doesn't necessarily mean it's all the same offender, but it does warrant some further investigation. So one cluster is the Newcastle cluster. We have Leanne Goodall, we have Robin Hickey and Amanda Robinson. Girls from the ages of 15 to 20 who all disappeared within, just a short time period of each other in such a small geographic area.
My name's Jane Goldsmith and I've been a reporter with NBN News for 24 years. I've covered numerous missing persons cases over that time, particularly missing young girls in the Hunter region. So on April 7, 1979, Robin Hickey, who was just 18, went missing from a bus stop at Belmont North. She'd been waiting at the bus stop, we believe, and she hasn't been seen since. Now, just 2 weeks later, 15-year-old Amanda Robinson had been at a school dance, and she was on a bus back to Swansea, quite close to Belmont. She made it to Swansea, we believe, but didn't make it home to her family that night. She was just 15 years old. Another local woman, Leanne Goodall, was last seen at Muswellbrook Railway Station, and she hasn't been seen since. Now, her sister, Pam, believes she may not have ever made it onto that train.
It's like the never-ending battle. Like it just never stops because there's no answers. No answers at all. My name is Pam Mitchell. My sister was Leanne Goodall, who disappeared 47 years ago, and her murder is still unsolved. Leanne was a free spirit. If she wanted to have a job, she'd have a job. If she wanted to take off, hitching up the coast, she'd do that. She was always on the go. Always on the go. She just, loved life, loved travel. She just loved everybody, and everybody loved her.
Now, Leanne Goodall was sighted that night on a bus at Belmont. So it's very possible she also went missing from around the same area as Amanda and Robin, and only a few months earlier.
We realised there was something wrong when Leanne was due to start at the art college and she didn't arrive back to start that course which she'd been accepted into. When she didn't arrive, my mum and my brother Warren went to the police. The police investigation was extremely minimal. They didn't interview my brother that, that Leanne shared a flat with. They didn't interview me. They didn't interview any other brothers. They didn't interview anyone. They didn't go down and see her friends that she was going to Sydney with. The police thought Leanne was just a runaway. That was it.
It seems absolutely unbelievable that the family members weren't interviewed, that police didn't take it seriously at the time. But again, she was treated as a runaway.
The disappearance of Leanne Goodall is absolutely concerning as to the investigation or the lack thereof.
So that was the last official sighting for a long time, and then a friend we went to school with come forward and said that she'd seen Leanne at the Star Hotel on the 31st of December.
There was some conjecture if she was actually at the Star Hotel. This is a hotel also frequented by serial killer Ivan Milat, who was convicted of 7 backpacker murders. But when the family members aren't interviewed and cross-referenced with what they're saying, you paint a picture where you may be looking at the wrong area. And to be told that she's 20 and she can do what she wants and she can run away, is certainly not good enough. These women are walking home from their friends, walking home from a dance, doing that every normal daily routine. Is it a spontaneous reaction that they're abducted off the street, or is it well planned? And there seems to be a similarity there with these young women going missing.
The other 3 young women who disappeared between 1979 and 1980 that I have included in the Newcastle cluster because of the situation in which they disappeared and their age range. So we have Amanda Zollis, Joy Hodgins, and Annie Tomanak. They're all between that kind of 14 and 20, so all vulnerable in that sense, and all young females. So what we have to realise for all 6 of these girls through to young women, they disappeared over such a short space of time, and they are actually geographically quite close. So that does seem like a really significant number of disappearances and murders that are currently unexplained. So I think certainly this particular cluster does need further investigation. I do believe that some of these girls and young women could actually be additional Milat victims.
Ivan Milat, one of Australia's most notorious psychopathic serial killers, was operating in the Newcastle area in the 1970s and 80s, working up there. And at that time, we saw a cluster of disappearances of young women that fit his MO. People picked up and disappeared. The question has to be asked, was he responsible? There's an enormous number of unsolved homicides. Some of them are clustered, and it has to be properly reinvestigated.
Ivan Milat is notorious in Australia. Between 1989 and 1992, he murdered at least 7 people. But he's long been suspected of having killed many more victims.
After Ivan Milat was found guilty of these 7 backpacker homicides and being led into a prison van, the corrective services officer was a former police officer. And as he led him into the back of the van, he said, well, they haven't found half of them.
Ivan Milat was a dangerous, deranged psychopath.
He was best described, I think, as a marauding serial killer, an opportunist. He would drive up and down the highway, and if people were hitchhiking, he would then strike. I'm Tim Watson-Munro. I'm a criminal psychologist with 47 years' experience. I was involved in assessing crimes of Ivan Milat, Australia's worst serial killer. I think he always had murder on his mind. He would be waiting for the opportunity.
Well, hitchhiking was, and to a limited extent still is, part of the fabric of this community. It's how you got around. There's no public transport. A lot of people didn't have the money, couldn't afford a car to get around. So they hitchhiked, they were always bludging lifts off friends, or if they're walking home from the pub, they're walking home from the pub because there's no taxi, there's no bus, there's no train.
But we do know that when people used to hitchhike, when we used to believe in the 70s and 80s that, this was a safer activity, that often that can lead police to go, oh, well, they're just, they're moving around, they could be anywhere. So there's almost a dismissal of some of those individuals.
I think this is symptomatic of the time, victim blaming. Police and some in the community saying, oh, well, they shouldn't have been hitchhiking. They're walking home from the pub drunk. They're on a remote local road, so they were asking for it. That's an appalling attitude today. Some people in the 70s and 80s would have had that, but it's utterly unacceptable.
Ultimately, we have to remember that hitchhiking makes you incredibly vulnerable. You are literally asking a stranger to stop and you get into their car. So for a predator, that is the ultimate playfield, isn't it? You can literally stop and they're at your mercy.
Milat operated as a road gang member, and wherever he worked, people tended to disappear.
I've looked very closely at Ivan Milat, not only for the crimes that we know that he committed, but also those that we suspect he may have had an involvement in. And we do know that Ivan Milat was familiar with the Newcastle area. He did drive up and down that highway, definitely within what I would class as a Milat comfort zone.
In the 2002 coronial inquest, Ivan Milat was named as a suspect of Leanne, Amanda and Robin homicides.
Police weren't taking any chances with one of the state's most dangerous criminals. Milat escorted to the inquest under heavy guard. The entire court complex was locked down, only a handful of lawyers, media and family allowed inside. Milat has been named as one of the main suspects in the murders of Leanne Goodall, Robin Hickey and schoolgirl Amanda Robinson.
Well, Ivan Milat was in the coronial inquiry where my family and the Robinson family and the Hickey family all sat in a room with, the mongrel. We all sat in a room and he gave you chills. You could just see the coldness in him, but yes, it wasn't a good feeling. It was scary to think that, that your sister's murderer could have been just there, and that's scary.
And I thought, oh my God, it's horrific to think that he got her.
Well, Ivan Milat could have been a suspect, mainly because, he'd murdered other people and, picked up other hitchhikers. He worked in the area at the time, but I don't really know.
In front of the families of the deceased, Ivan Milat made cruel and unwanted comments suggesting that they had been negligent in terms of not reporting the disappearance in a quick period of time, and more generically that they should have been more vigilant to the whereabouts of their children, allowing them to be out and about unsupervised at that age. Those comments, I think, give you a window into the mind and thinking of a psychopath and a serial killer. And he is acknowledged as Australia's worst serial killer. There's no empathy, no remorse, no caring for the survivors of the deceased. It's all about, I think, power, adding to their distress by tormenting them. And this tends to be one of the themes with serial killers.
Ivan Milat never admitted any guilt to the 7 murders he was convicted of, and went to the grave still saying he didn't commit the terrible killings. So sadly, it was unlikely that he was ever going to shed any light on the disappearance of Leanne Goodall, Robin Hickey and Amanda Robinson.
And he said he didn't do it. But, you know, you can't believe a psychopath. How many other crazy people are there out in the world? You know, how many other psychopaths? How many copycat killers? Who knows? Like, it might have been Ivan Milat, but might not have too.
I believe that Milat was responsible for some of those disappearances, and ultimately that those young women are deceased, but whether we will ever be sure, I don't know.
Well, what's tragic is not only the crimes and the injustice of what happened to these young women, but the impact it's had on their families and the broader community. It just trickles down through scores and possibly hundreds of people if you really add it all up. So in reaching out to the families, I saw that they were still grieving. They were still absolutely ruined by these tragedies, by these murders, by these disappearances. And they felt it every day. And they were pleased that someone cared. Another person was taking up the issue, was going to raise it in Parliament, because they never give up. And that's the key thing. We can never give up on these women. I ask the government, I ask anyone to say it's not the case. The worst serial killer in the nation's history has gotten away with it. Ivan Milat was convicted of 7 murders. There is someone on the North Coast that has murdered as many or more, and they are still amongst us if they haven't died or fled the country. The worst crime in our state's history is unresolved.
I've worked with families of victims of crime for many years now, and personally I never give up hope looking for answers. What struck me through my experience with those families is that the pain is as raw to them today as it was when it happened. It never goes away.
For these families, it's 30 to 40 years of pain, suffering, anguish, not knowing what happened to these girls.
With Leanne, like, there was no funeral, you know, but it is hard because you've got nowhere to go and have a chat to them or take flowers or anything like that. It's like a no man's land.
In our situation, you always hope, but experience teaches you that after a certain amount of time and you're bound to be disappointed again. There's no such thing as closure in this world.
Jim Hickey spent a lifetime searching for answers about his girl, Robin Hickey. And one of the things he said to me is, well, if we're going to get answers, they have to come soon because I'm not going to last forever. And that has stayed with me because only a couple of years later, Jim died. And he went to his grave not knowing what happened to Robin.
The whole family is broken about Leanne. It takes a toll, especially on my mum. I mean, having kids myself, I couldn't stand the thought of, you know, like losing a child like that, you know, and not knowing where they were. Mum died in 2012, heartbroken. So yeah, it's very hard.
Mum and Dad, like salt of the earth people, they had a very tough life. Mum, she loved her 4 children. And on her deathbed in Bankstown Hospital, she said to me, she said, "Gary, don't give up." And I said, "Mum, I won't. We won't."
It is incumbent on us to stop sticking our head in the sand when it comes to this issue. It is appalling, it is difficult, but these women, these communities absolutely demand it. They are demanding that we do something about it now. And we know when it comes to these matters, it's difficult and there is resistance. It's going to cost money. It's going to mean resources. But so what? There is someone either still active, who knows, murdering people. There is someone sitting in a retirement home getting away literally with murder. That stops today. I'll never give up until we get the resources put into this matter.
Those individuals could still be alive. I always think about the serial predators living in the suburbs, because ultimately it is the unexpected. It is the person who looks innocent, who you walk past every day and say hi to, who's, shopping in the same place as you. They're not monsters. They don't stand out. So those individuals could still be alive, which means they could still be brought to justice.